This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And this week's episode of Tigers Talk is brought to you by both the Legacy Football Organization and the Detroit Sports Commission. And our newest sponsor at the DSP Network is Legacy Football. And remember, guys, the Legacy Football Organization was founded in 2009. It is the premier, the ultra-premier offseason development program in the state of Michigan, in the Midwest, in the entire U.S. of A. And it provides unique platforms for student-athletes both on and off the football field through community service, social awareness, education, and football. On its staff, Legacy Football possesses a ton of former collegiate stars and NFL players, including legendary Lions wide receiver Herman Moore and a past guest on Too Bad Hombres, and a former All-American linebacker at Michigan State University, and a Super Bowl champion with the New York Giants, Greg Jones. And to find out more info about Legacy Football, please contact National Director of Football Operations Justin Sassante or go online to www.legacyfootballorg.com. And now to the Detroit Sports Commission. And John and I love Chris Smith, Marty Dobek, and all of the staff and all of the people that are in charge of making the Detroit Sports Commission the great entity that it is. And the Detroit Sports Commission, since 2001, has been bringing marquee events on both the national and international level to the Metro Detroit area. And these events include the finest amateur sporting events in all of the nation, such as the Zenith Prep Kickoff Classic, which I have loved working in the past and hope to work again in 2019. And to find out more about all of the events that the Detroit Sports Commission is bringing to our very region, once again, that is the Metro Detroit area, please follow the DSC on Twitter and on Instagram at DET Sports, and make sure to check out the Detroit Sports Commission's great website at www.detroitsports.org. And welcome to the latest, the freshest edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I'm your host, Vito Geronimo Chirco, alongside nobody for right now. Max Bultman of the Athletic Detroit will be joining me shortly for a segment on the Tigers, their offseason. And first with Max, we cover the 2018 campaign that was for the Tigers, finishing 64-98 in two straight seasons, and Max gives his reaction to the Tigers on the field in 2018 and to some news and notes regarding the Tigers in this offseason. And the Doc will not be joining me, with that being said, as he is off for Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to him and his family. So this podcast is coming out before Thanksgiving. And then you have Too Bad Hombres, which will be released, as it usually is, on Saturday. So even with the holiday, and really the holiday season being in full bloom, we are still releasing our Too Bad Hombres episodes every single Saturday. And our guest this week for Doc and I, as Doc joins me for that episode this week, is former San Francisco 49ers offensive lineman, an offensive guard and center with the 49ers, who won 4 Super Bowls, played in 182 games from 1983 to 1997 with the 49ers, and that is Jesse Sapolu. So he is a guest on this week's episode of Too Bad Hombres. But now I digress, as we are here for Tigers Talk. And on Tigers Talk this week, let me give you a few highlights of what I want to touch upon before I get into my discussion with Max Bultman. First, how about Franklin Perez, a 20-year-old right-hander being added to the 40-man roster ahead of the Rule 5 draft on December 13th to prevent him from being drafted by somebody in that Rule 5 draft when it does occur next month. And do remember that he didn't have the best 2018 season for himself, as he really slogged through an injury-ridden season. He missed 2+ months with a lat strain and pitched just 19 1/3 innings before being shut down for the season with a shoulder injury. Now, with that being said, the right-hander is still widely considered to be a premium pitching prospect for the Tigers in their farm system, but a guy that won't see the major leagues until 2020 at least. And Max Bultman does give his thoughts on that as well about Franklin Perez and when he does expect Perez to reach the majors. So it won't be in 2019, I'll just say that, but stay tuned for Max's answer on that front. Now, before I get to Max once again, another headline or two that I want to touch upon, including just some thoughts that I want to provide on a few Tigers offensive players, starting with Nick Castellanos, whose name has been circulating in trade rumors of late. And remember, he hit 298, a team best 298 of all guys that qualified on the team in 2018. And he started in right field and honestly showcased some shoddy glove work in right field, not being able to react and judge balls right off the bat very well. And it was his first full season starting in right field, but it looks like he's not suited and made out to be a right fielder on an everyday basis at the major league level, and probably is better reserved for a corner infield and specifically a first base role on a starting basis moving forward, and or a DH role. And I could see Castellanos shifting on and off between first base and DH in the future. Now, maybe not in 2019, but remember, he might not even be a Detroit Tiger come opening day of 2019. Now, if he is, though, I am going to say he will be the Tigers' starting right fielder. Come 2020, though, how about the possibility of Miguel Cabrera being the starting everyday DH and Nick Castellanos shifting over full-time to first base? And you could still have Cabby spell Casty at first base here and there, but Cabrera, with his health issues in recent memory, including this past season, I think he's a guy that's not best suited for first base on a full-time basis moving forward. And then it's not just Cabrera and Castellanos that could be playing at DH come 2019, come 2020, but also Kristen Stewart, the left fielder, who recorded a 792 OPS in 17 games played in 2018. Showcased a good bat, good power stroke in his bat. So we know what he can do with the bat, but defensively, he's another guy with shoddy glove work in the corner outfield that is better suited more than likely for a DH spot in the near future as well. Even with his youth on his side, I don't think he sustains that starting job in left field. Now, in 2019, I think it's more likely that the Tigers do hand him the left fielder job come opening day. Yet in 2020 and beyond, he's a guy that I think could be seeing increasing time at DH and allowing the Tigers to have some flexibility at that spot between Castellanos, if he's still on the Tigers, in 2020, as well as with Miguel Cabrera and Kristen Stewart. And a lot of ball clubs at the major league level are now becoming more and more accustomed to that, moving in that direction of having multiple guys play at DH and not having a full-time guy at DH as the Tigers have had in recent memory with Victor Martinez, who has now retired. So that's a big topic of conversation that I think we will discuss, meaning Doc and I, on future episodes of Tigers Talk heading into the new year and beyond. As I don't think the issue with kind of a potential log jam at first base in the near future will be resolved anytime soon. And I think it will be a very fresh topic of conversation subsequently as we head into opening day of next season. And those were my thoughts on just some hitters from the Tigers and, a situation or two that is fresh and could become even more widely present as time goes on, as I reflected upon Franklin Perez and the situation with him when he could reach the majors, and on, Nick Castellanos, and I didn't even give my opinion on whether or not he'll be a member of the Tigers come opening day, but I'll say this and leave you guys with this before I get to my discussion with Max Bultman. I think the Tigers will deal anybody, are willing to deal anybody for the right offer, including Nick Castellanos. Despite his great season last year, I think the Tigers would be more than willing to move on from Nick Castellanos if they get a so-called premium of package of prospects in return for his services, which would be maybe one top-tier guy and a middle-tier guy or a couple of middle-tier prospects. I think the Tigers would then move Nick Castellanos. And also remember, Castellanos' ultimate trade value isn't nearly as high as you would expect. With his great bat, what he showcased hitting for average, hitting for power as well this past season, Still, his trade value is diminished because of the fact that he's not the greatest defender. And remember, couldn't cut it at third base. Now hasn't really been able to cut it in the corner outfield at right field. So really doesn't have a true position for himself on the diamond. And because of that, really, teams will look at him, especially, specifically in the NL, and say, well, there's no room for him because he can't play in the field. So really, he's an American League player that is best suited for DH duties. And you could say not only the long-term future, but also in the near future. And with all of that being said, let me get to my discussion now with Max Bultman of the Athletic Detroit. And in this first answer that he provides to me, it is in regards to his thoughts on how the Tiger season did go in 2018. Enjoy.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much in line with how things were expected to go for them. I think maybe the biggest surprise is that the record of 64-98 only gets you the fifth pick in the draft. I think a lot of people were thinking this would be another year where the Tigers were going to be right up there, picking at the very top, and realistically they still are. But that's kind of the surprising thing, right? Is how many teams there were that were in that bottom tier, and a couple of them like markedly below that, like the Orioles. Just heads and shoulders below the rest there.
Yeah, and you know what? There's not a lot of parity in the American League right now. You saw the Red Sox win 108 games, win the World Series. Yankees won 100. Astros are a dominant team, won 100 games. You had 3 teams win 100 at least games in the American League this season. And then the Yankees get James Paxton, just acquired him. But that's a topic for another day as we're looking at the Tigers. And let's focus on, how about 20-year-old right-hander Franklin Perez, who was just added to the 40-man roster to avoid him being taken in the Rule 5 draft on December 13th. When do you expect him to make his Major League debut? And could it come in 2019, Max?
Oh, I'd be stunned if it came in 2019. He had a lot of injury problems last year. Like you said, the 40-man thing is pretty much purely to shield, in my view, it's pretty much pure to shield him from the Rule 5 draft. I think Perez is going to have to do a lot of work to come back. That's not to say the injuries were necessarily catastrophic or anything like that, but when you miss functionally an entire season, I think that kind of makes you reassess a timeline at the very least, if not, maybe a little more of how prominently somebody's going to necessarily figure it. Now, you don't want to overreact. Like, guys get injured for a year, but I think especially the fact that it was 2 separate injuries would make you a little worried. And just the fact that, as you're planning for what this Tigers roster is going to look like when it really takes shape here, that the next contender is supposed to be in, 2 or 3 years for the AL Central, I think it just makes you reassess the timeline for that. Not that necessarily Perez is the make or break, but, it's just the kind of thing that I would not rush him at all. He was a key piece in the Justin Verlander trade. So I'm certainly not 2019. I think you're looking more like, 2020, 2021.
Let's now take a look at Miguel Cabrera. How about him being the Tigers' starting first baseman come 2020? So far ahead looking into the future.
Cabrera, I'll say no at first base. Could either be because of injury or a move to DH, but thankfully I don't think I have to clarify that one here.
Now, what kind of guy could you see the Tigers adding to play shortstop in 2019?
You're looking at guys like Freddie Galvis, Adeiny Echeverria, Jordy Mercer as kind of that same mold, right? They've got 3 shortstop prospects who are kind of at the fringe of they're not ready this year, and you're not quite sure that they're ever going to be your everyday shortstop kind of thing. Personally, I think you could probably get at least a couple years out of that group combined to man shortstop, but I do think like you're looking probably down to Wenzel Perez before the next guy that you'd really be real eager for if you're a Tigers fan to see as the everyday guy. Now that can change. I mean, you got a guy in Alcantara who's got an unbelievable arm. I saw him in the area this year, and that's fun, right? Like that's the kind of fun thing. But you're just not sure if he's going to hit to justify it. A few other guys in that same kind of mix where there's a couple tools or maybe there's average across the board. But I think right now you're looking for 2019, you're looking at bringing in a veteran to hold it down for another year or two until kind of that whole thing can work itself out.
Do you think Niko Goodrum will be the Tigers' starting second baseman come opening day?
Love Niko's game. I think he's was a great find by the Tigers, and they had a little bit of an inside advantage having him come from Ron Gardenhire's system when he was in Minnesota. But Goodrum paid off in a huge way for them this year. He had some big hits. He killed the Twins every time he played him, it seemed like. I think he's your, maybe not quite every day, but I think games at second base from Niko Goodrum in 2019 and scattered games elsewhere on the line. I think he's just, when it comes to their bats, weird as it is to say about a guy who hit, what was it? He probably hit 245, 250 or something like that last year. But I think he probably is one of their more essential bats for this team right now.
So the Tigers have a few needs, obviously, right? I mean, don't have to even say it. We all know it as Tigers fans and pundits, media members, whatever you want to call us, and you as a media member, specifically, Max. What would you like to see the Tigers add, specifically now, when it comes to their lineup, to help out their lineup come 2019?
I mean, I think DJ LeMahieu is a name that's gotten some floating, and this is going to contradict what I just said about Niko, but he's a veteran, and I know that it's not the kind of thing that's necessarily going to help whenever your next competitive team is. He'll be on the older side by then. I think there's something really valuable about having that kind of veteran presence around, and you never know how long he's going to be able to keep it up. So that's a guy that I'm particularly interested in. It allows you to free up Niko to move him elsewhere around the field. He's played a little bit of shortstop. I don't know that you want him there every day. Niko's great in a super utility role too. So that's an option. It's just the tough thing, right? Of the things that the Tigers need, everybody needs, right? They need a better catcher. They need a center fielder who can really hit. Good luck. I mean, so does everybody, right? That's why you take them in the top 10 of the draft, or you pay them huge money. I would not be going after Manny Machado or Bryce Harper, obviously. Although I do think there's something to be said for getting a piece like that. I mean, you kind of saw with the Tigers when they did get Miguel Cabrera, that was sort of an all-in move. It's just not, the system's not in place to do something like that right now, right? Or like a Pudge Rodriguez kind of thing, even before that. I still think they're probably a year or two away from being able to make those kind of signings. But we'll kind of see how things shake out. I think a lot of it depends on how different guys look in the spring. Pitching, I think, you could probably afford to sign another starter. You probably need to sign another starter, I should say. But I think you do it in the mold of what you did last year with Francisco Liriano, and you kind of wait and see, all right, who's the veteran guy that I can get late in the game without having to get into a bidding war? Because let's be honest, that's not the position that these guys are in right now. That's kind of who I would be targeting. I don't know that I have a specific name in the rotation per se, but anybody that you like in the veteran kind of category, and maybe somebody you think you can maybe flip if you get them on a 2-year deal or something that and they want to not have a no trade clause. I mean, I don't know who's necessarily clamoring to come to rebuilding teams, but when the price is right, people do things, right? So I don't know. I don't know that fully answers your question, but that's kind of where my head would be at.
It's good enough. I'll let it slide, Max. No, but I'm thinking of veteran arms. Edwin Jackson, could he make a reunion in Motown? He spent that one good season in 2009. Then they flipped him for Max Scherzer as part of that 3-way deal. He's been a journeyman forever. He had a good season, second half with the A's there. So who knows who it will be. But in that mold of Mike Fiers, who was the highest WARP player for the Tigers in 2018, even though he was dealt to the A's, that's according to BaseballReference.com. Now, for you, I want to look at the starting rotation a little bit for the Tigers. Guys that are already on the team. Michael Fulmer and Daniel Norris now, specifically. Both guys didn't have the greatest seasons. Norris, an ERA over 5. Fulmer did not look like an ace-caliber arm. Both were hurt in 2018. What do you expect out of both of them in 2019, Max?
Well, I would push back on the Fulmer didn't look like an ace-caliber arm.
He did at times, just not consistently, as much as the Tigers desired, right?
Right, and I think part of that was injury. I think he was starting to get some things worked out at various points before the injuries, and I don't really know how to explain it, because I know it was a focus for Fulmer to stay healthy. I don't think he was necessarily overexerting in that way. I think he was pushing, but that's what you get when you get a guy like that. And I think the arm, everything about the arm still suggests to me that this guy can be a number 1 pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. But I think it's about health. And if he's healthy and if he can be right, he can be that. And I think even with some of the ways it went last year, I mean, you look at how it happened, and a lot of it was like getting into the third time through the order. And obviously you're not necessarily going to be a number 1 if you're only making it 4 or 5 innings, like something like that. But if you can be a solid 5 or 6 inning guy, and I know that's not what Michael Fulmer wants to be, that's still valuable. I'm saying that as sort of as an alternative way of looking at things. Now, I think the ideal for everybody involved is if Michael Fulmer is able to kind of work out maybe some of whatever has been causing those injuries, whether it's something that's in the gym, or whether it's something in his recovery, or whether it's something in his motion, whatever that is, if he can get that worked out, I don't think you have any concerns with Michael Fulmer. Daniel Norris is a different situation, because while he has been injured and while he has some of the most electric stuff in the organization, he also has some command stuff going on. And so that's when it gets into a twofold thing. Daniel is a great guy, like him a lot. I think the Tigers would be better off having him around in some capacity, even if it means a move to the bullpen. But I think it's the kind of thing where you got to be a little more cautious in how prominently you're counting on him in the coming couple of years.
So I'll leave you with this regarding Norris. Is he a member of the Tigers starting rotation in 2019?
Yes, I think he is.
And he's still got talent. He's still got that upside, Max, I guess you could say. And I think they're hoping for him to become that, maybe not an ace caliber starting arm at this point after what he's gone through, but a middle of the rotation kind of guy, would you say, Matt?
Yeah, if he can be a 3 or 4, 3 even maybe a little, like, he can be a 4 with really good stuff, like a 4 who can give you what you need out of a number 4 starter and sometimes a really great game, that's perfectly valuable. Like, he's going to have some of those games where he strikes out 9 guys. If you can get that from your number 4 starter, I take that every time, as long as the other times out aren't all over the place.
What's the timetable for the Tigers returning to relevance? Is it 2020 or after 2020?
After 2020. I've kind of circled 2022, I think, is when I think I feel comfortable with it. 2021, if a couple things go right. You're looking at prospects when you talk about stuff like that. But, you think about Cameron and Perez are kind of the guys that are not going to be your headliners. Those are the kind of guys you want as your supporting good MLB players, but they're not. You don't have a superstar in the system right now in offense. You got a couple pitchers that could be in Mize and Manning, who I really, really like, but you're looking at a little more time, I think, unless they're going to bring somebody in a free agency or something to draft and develop a headliner at the plate.
So if it's 2021, I'm going to have to do a lot of crying here. But I'll just say that, Max. Anyways, so you cover the Wings as well for the Athletic Detroit. Now, who returns to relevance first? And I know the Wings have, shown some hot hockey of late, have won some games, piled up some wins in a row too. But who returns to relevance at a high degree first, the Wings or the Tigers?
I think it's the Red Wings, and I think a couple reasons for it. Number one, they just already kind of have that secondary core in place when you talk about some of these guys in Athanasiou and Matt. Now, whatever happens with those guys, obviously up for debate. You got Larkin, who I think people would kind of dispute whether he's kind of part of a secondary core or a core. I think I'm coming around to the idea that he can be maybe not a top flight center in the league, but certainly a top 30 center in this league, which I don't know what people's definition of a first line center is, but that means he'd be a center on kind of a top center on a given team. I think you'd like to get another really, really good center who's at least as good, if not better than Larkin. That's where you're looking to the draft this year. Potentially somebody like a Jack Hughes or a Kirby Datch, or if you want to go to the wing, a Capo Caco. And you've also got Zadina, who can be a game breaker. I just think they have the more of the pieces in place. I don't think what they have, and Joe Veleno too, they don't have the whole thing right now to be a top 4 team in a conference, like even when you factor in some of the prospects. But I don't think they're that far off being able to make those moves, at least. Depending on how the draft shakes out this year and free agency, you want to shore up the blue line. You want to get a legit top pair defenseman. But after that, you only really need top pair defenseman and a couple top forwards. And when you got potentially a top 10 pick coming this year and some cap space freeing up, it's not that I think it's a lock. It's not that I think everything's in motion. It's just that they're in striking range, right? They're in position that if they can get a couple things to go their way, if Zadina hits, if Veleno hits, and if their 2019 draft pick hits, you bring in 1 or 2 good free agents and you're there, right? Then you're talking 2020, 2021 kind of thing, maybe 21, 22, depending on development timelines. But at the very least, you're looking at a situation where I'm not saying everything's a lock. I'm not saying it's as long as things go as planned, it's good. It's just you need only a couple things to go right. The Tigers, that list is a little bit longer than that.
Well, Mr. Multidimensional Media member Max Bultman, with that, thanks for all the time, man, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks so much for having me today.
And that is all she wrote with Max Bultman on this week's episode of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company, in this pre-Thanksgiving edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you and your families and friends out there. Hope you enjoy it with your family and friends, and have a great Thanksgiving. And I'll be back with Doc in studio for next week's edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. And as usual, thanks to our great sponsors at the DSP Network for sponsoring this very episode of Tigers Talk. And I am speaking of the Legacy Football Organization and the Detroit Sports Commission. And remember, you can check out Legacy Football at www.legacyfootballorg.com. And you can also check out the Detroit Sports Commission at detroitsports.org. Also, remember to check out the Detroit Sports Podcast Network's website at detroitsportspodcast.com, and you can follow the Detroit Sports Podcast on Twitter at Detroit Podcast. Adios for now, and I'll talk to you next week.